That boy was once a barefoot dancer in the streets, dancing just to survive. Now, Chukwudi Nnamdi is about to step into a world he never dared to dream of. From the majestic iron gates of a prestigious academy to the dazzling lights of a grand stage, his journey will be a trial that takes him from darkness into the light. This is the continuation of the story that has touched the hearts of so many. The story of the boy who used his dance to find a family. And believe me, what happens next will inspire you and stay with you forever. The morning sun cast golden rays upon the majestic iron gates of Kingsway Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in Lagos. Its ancient brick walls were covered with vibrant bougainvillea, and the lawn inside was lush green, perfectly trimmed to the centimeter. For most students, this was a familiar sight, but for Chukwudi, it was like a fortress he wasn't sure he could conquer. The night before, he had sat in his room, staring at the new uniform neatly folded on his chair. His fingers brushed against the smooth linen fabric, but instead of joy, he felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. What if I don't fit in? What if they laugh at me? He whispered to himself. Mr. Edward had knocked gently on the door before entering. Seeing the worry in Chukwudi's eyes, he sat down beside him. Chukwudi, he said gently, I know tomorrow might feel like you're about to stand on a grand stage before the whole world. And yes, there will be whispers. There will be people who doubt you. But listen to me. You don't have to prove you belong here, because you already do. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. You are a Nnamdi, not because of the name, but because of the heart you carry. Remember this. The courage you had when you danced in the streets to fight off hunger, that courage will take you anywhere. And if there's ever a moment you feel small, hold your head high. Even kings were once boys that no one believed in. Those words still echoed in Chukwudi's mind as he stood before the school gates, holding Adeze's hand tightly. She, in an identical uniform, smiled reassuringly at her brother. Over the past 6 months, she had become his closest ally. Her legs were steady now, her laughter as clear as a melody. Just a few months ago, her world was confined to a wheelchair, but today, she walked with freedom and joy, each step a living testament to resilience and hope. As Chukwudi and Adeze walked through the wide corridors of Kingsway Academy, soft whispers followed them like shadows. Is that the street boy? Why is someone like him here? He doesn't belong. Every word was like a needle prick against his skin, and Chukwudi felt his ears burn. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, he wished he could disappear. The polished tiles under his feet seemed to get harder with every step. The walls were taller, the stairs steeper. But then Mr. Edward's words returned, strong and steady, as if spoken directly to his heart. You are my son. You belong here. Chukwudi lifted his head slightly. His steps were still slow, but no longer hesitant. Adeze's small hand in his gave him strength, and together, they continued forward. In the classroom, the teacher introduced him. Class, this is Chukwudi Nnamdi. The surname Nnamdi sent a ripple of astonished whispers through the room. Adeze clapped softly and smiled at him. That smile gave him strength. For the first time, Chukwudi sat at a real school desk, opened a new notebook, and held a pencil that wasn't borrowed. He was no longer the barefoot boy under the bridge. He was a student, one of them, or at least he hoped so. But the following days were harder than Chukwudi had imagined. In class, he answered questions with his street-smart wit, but some students mocked his pronunciation. At lunch, a few burst out laughing when they saw Chukwudi eating so quickly, almost as if he thought the food would disappear. The street kid at Kingsway Academy. No way. A curly-haired boy muttered. Just wait for the exams. He's going to fail for sure, another added, and the group burst into laughter. The words cut him deeply. But Chukwudi just lowered his head and continued to eat. He didn't want them to see how much it hurt. He clenched his fists under the table, trying to fight back the bitterness from the whispers and laughter around him. Just then, Adeze came over and sat down next to him. She placed her food tray on the table and gave him a bright, steady smile. Don't listen to them, she said softly. You belong here, just like everyone else. Her words were simple, but they lifted the weight from his chest. For the first time that day, Chukwudi let out a slow breath. With Adaeze by his side, the doubtful voices didn't seem so loud anymore. However, on quiet nights, when the mansion had fallen asleep and Adaeze was dreaming, Chukwudi would sometimes sit by the window, hot tears streaming down his cheeks. The bed beneath him was soft, the roof over his head was secure, but his heart felt heavy. The streets had been cruel, yes, but they had never made him feel as invisible as these whispers did. The following weeks passed, and the whispers continued to follow Chukwudi through the halls of Kingsway Academy. But then one morning, a brightly colored poster appeared on the school's main notice board, catching everyone's attention. The large, bold letters read, "Kingsway's Annual Talent Gala, let your talent shine." The atmosphere in the school immediately became electric. Students gathered around, buzzing with talk of costumes, music, and performances. Who would sing? Who would play the piano? Who would perform a short play? Excitement filled the air. Adize's eyes lit up as soon as she read the words. She tugged on Chukwudi's sleeve, her voice firm and full of excitement. "You have to enter," she said decisively. Chukwudi froze, his stomach tightening. Dancing in the garden for Adaeze was one thing. But dancing in front of the entire school, in front of teachers, students, and wealthy parents, was something else entirely. The thought terrified him. "Me? In front of everyone?" he whispered, his voice full of doubt. Adaeze nodded, without a hint of hesitation. "Yes, you were born to do this." Chukwudi hesitated, then glanced around. A few students had already started pointing and snickering. It was Obi Okoro and his group of friends. Obi crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. "Did you hear that, guys?" he said loud enough for everyone around to hear. "The street clown is going to join the talent gala. He's probably going to perform his little tricks from the Ojota bus park." One of Obi's friends chimed in. "Or maybe he'll hold out his raggedy hat for money after he's done." The group erupted in laughter. Their laughter was cold and cruel. The words were like daggers straight to Chukwudi's heart. He clenched his fists, his face burning with shame and anger. He remembered the cold nights under the bridge when he danced just to forget his hunger. He remembered Adieze's laughter, the sound that had brought her back to life. He was about to turn away, to run from the taunts, to surrender to his own fear. But then he saw Adieze's eyes. There was no pity in them, only an ironclad belief, an unwavering support. Her gaze said, "I believe in you." And then Mr. Edwards' words echoed in his head. "The courage you had when you danced in the streets will take you anywhere." A fire ignited in Chukwudi's chest. This was no longer about dancing. This was a fight to defend his own honor, to protect Adieze's smile, and to prove that he was not a clown. He belonged here. Slowly, with his hands still trembling but his gaze now firm, Chukwudi walked towards the notice board. He took the pen hanging from a string. All the noise around him seemed to fade away. He could feel dozens of eyes fixed on him. And then, with a clear, decisive stroke, he wrote his name on the sign-up sheet, under the dance category, Chukwudi Namdi. The whispers around him immediately grew louder, filled with astonishment and ridicule. But Chukwudi no longer heard them. He just turned to look at Adieze and gave a slight nod. He didn't say a word, but Adieze understood. He had accepted the challenge. He would not run anymore. He would dance. From the day Chukwudi signed his name on the list, the garden of the Namdi mansion was transformed. It was no longer just a makeshift stage for playful antics. It had become a serious rehearsal space. Every afternoon after school, while the other children at Kingsway were attending violin lessons or fencing classes, Chukwudi would take off his restrictive leather shoes, letting his bare feet feel the familiar grass. He practiced for hours, his t-shirt soaked with sweat. He spun, flipped, and performed steps he had created himself from memories of the bustling Lagos streets. Adieze had taken on her new role with extreme seriousness. She was no longer a clapping spectator. She had become Chukwudi's coach, director, and toughest critic. Sitting on a wicker chair, holding a notebook and pen, she observed her brother's every move. "Again," she commanded, after Chukwudi had just completed a complex turn. "Your spin was wobbly, faster, more decisive. You have to show them you own the stage, not that the stage owns you. It's just a dance, Adeze, Chukwudi panted, his hands on his knees. Adeze shook her head, her gaze surprisingly stern. No, it's not just a dance anymore. This is our story. You have to tell it right. Tell them about the Ojota bus park, tell them about the cold nights, and tell them about the laughter. They have to understand. Spurred on by his sister's determination, Chukwudi continued. He was no longer dancing just for fun. He was dancing to tell a story. Each step was a word, each leap a sentence. He was weaving a poem with his own body. Meanwhile, the news that the Namdas's street boy would be participating in the talent gala had spread like wildfire through Lagos high society. At the exclusive Ikoyi Golf Club, where multi-million-dollar deals were signed over fine whiskey, the story became a major topic of conversation. One evening, as Mr. Edward was sitting with a few business partners, a large man in a magnificent agbada approached his table. It was Chief Okoro, Obi Okoro's father and also Mr. Edward's biggest competitor in the telecommunications industry. Edward, my brother. Chief Okoro began with a polite smile, but his eyes were full of calculation. I hear your adopted son is performing at the Kingsway Gala. What a brave gesture. Mr. Edward just took a sip of his drink, not responding. Chief Okoro continued, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. Listen, as a friend, I'm just worried about you. You've spent a lifetime building the Namdi name. To let a boy of unknown origins, with his street dances, represent your family on such a prestigious stage. Isn't that too risky? What will people say? They will laugh at you, Edward. The atmosphere around the table grew tense. The other business partners fell silent, glancing at Mr. Edward, waiting for his reaction. They were used to a cool, calculated Edward Namdi, who always put reputation and image first. They expected him to find a way for Chukwudi to withdraw gracefully. But they were wrong. Mr. Edward slowly put his glass down on the table. He looked up, meeting Chief Okoro's gaze directly, and for the first time that evening, he smiled. But it wasn't a polite smile. It was the smile of a lion. My reputation, Okoro? He said, his tone calm but each word as heavy as lead. Let me tell you about my reputation. My daughter is walking again, thanks to that boy. My house, which was once filled with silence, is now filled with laughter, also thanks to that boy. That boy has more courage and a purer heart than half the people sitting in this room combined. Those are the things that define the Namdi name today, not what you all whisper behind my back. Mr. Edward stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the space. That boy will dance, and I will be sitting in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else. If you find that laughable, then by all means, laugh. But remember, while you are busy laughing at kindness, I am busy building a family. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Chief Okoro and the others speechless at the table. That night, when Mr. Edward returned to the mansion, he didn't go straight to his study. He walked out onto the balcony, looking down at the garden illuminated by soft lights. Down below, Chukwudi was still practicing, his body moving rhythmically under the moonlight. The boy attempted a difficult flip, stumbled on the landing, and fell to the grass. But he didn't stay down. He immediately jumped up and tried again. Beside him, Adaize was clapping a beat, her voice ringing out in the quiet night. Again, Chukwudi. You'll get it this time. Looking at his two children, one fighting to perfect a dance, the other fighting to reclaim every step, Mr. Edward's heart swelled with an intense pride. He had just fought for them in a world of calculation and prejudice. And now, they were fighting for themselves, with their own strength and will. Their family, though built from imperfect pieces, was unusually united. The day of the talent gala finally arrived. The auditorium of Kingsway Academy glittered under the brilliant stage lights. The red velvet seats were packed with parents, the men in elegant suits and the women in gorgeous outfits, cameras and phones at the ready. The air buzzed with excited whispers. For most people, this was just an annual school event. For Chukwudi, it was the biggest test of his life. Backstage, His hands and feet were trembling. His uniform had been replaced by a simple performance costume. Adizay had helped him choose a rustic white shirt, dark trousers, and soft canvas shoes. Compared to the sparkling sequined outfits of the other contestants, he looked completely out of place. He peeked through the stage curtain. The crowd seemed endless. His heart pounded in his chest. He could see Chief Okoro and his son, Obi, sitting in one of the front rows, their faces full of smug confidence. Fear, like a cold hand, squeezed his throat. He wanted to run. Brother Chukwudi. He turned. Adeze was standing there. She had been allowed backstage to stay with him. She saw the panic in her brother's eyes. She walked over, took his trembling hands, and held them tight. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Forget all of them. Think about the garden. It's just you dancing, and me clapping. Nothing else matters. Tell our story." Chukwudi took a deep breath and closed his eyes. In his mind, the image of the green garden appeared. He heard Adeze's laughter. The cold hand around his throat seemed to loosen a bit. Then, the host's voice boomed like thunder. "And now, a unique performance from one of our new students. Please give a round of applause for Chukwudi Namdi." Whispers immediately erupted in the audience. "Is that him? What is he wearing? Let's see what this joke is all about." The music started. It wasn't a gentle classical piece. It was a powerful Afrobeat rhythm, with a driving drumbeat and a vibrant bass line, a rhythm from the very streets of Lagos. For a heartbeat, Chukwudi froze under the glare of the stage lights. The whispers seemed to engulf him. Obi Okoro smirked, certain the boy was about to embarrass himself. But then, Chukwudi saw them in the front row. Mr. Edward was sitting up straight, his gaze holding not worry, but a solid belief. He gave a slight nod. Beside him, Adieze was beaming, her eyes sparkling. He remembered the hungry nights when he danced so that the hunger wouldn't win. He remembered Adeze's laughter, the spark that brought her back to life. The fear inside him dissolved. His body came alive. He began to dance. And it wasn't just a dance. It was a story told in the language of the body. The first part, his movements were sharp, urgent, and somewhat chaotic. He reenacted the hustle, the relentless struggle for survival on the crowded streets. The audience, expecting a ballet or a gentle contemporary dance, was stunned by the raw and intense energy. Then the music softened a bit. Chukwudi's dance changed. It became softer, more playful. He mimicked the funny moves, the slips, and the clownish faces he had used to make Adeze laugh for the first time in the garden. A few chuckles began to ripple through the audience. The icy wall of prejudice began to crack. And then, the music exploded again. But this time it was not chaos, but joy. His dance expressed strength, happiness, and pride. He performed a high leap, landing perfectly. He spun like a whirlwind, then stopped abruptly, reenacting the image of someone stumbling while learning to walk, almost falling, but then being lifted by an invisible force, standing taller and stronger than before. Finally, as the last drum beats faded, he ended in a powerful pose, chest forward, head held high, arms spread wide as if embracing the world, his eyes locked on his family. When the music ended, the auditorium fell into an almost absolute silence. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, processing what they had just witnessed. And then, a single clap rang out, clear and decisive. Mr. Edward Anamdi was on his feet, applauding with pride, tears glistening in his eyes. Adeze stood up beside him, her applause echoing. Then, the entire auditorium erupted. Cheers, applause, and whistles thundered through the hall. The people who had whispered, the ones who had mocked, were now all on their feet, clapping relentlessly. Obi Okoro sat frozen in his seat, his face a mixture of disbelief and bitter defeat. The judges huddled together, whispering and nodding continuously, their faces filled with awe and admiration. When the head judge stepped onto the stage, the auditorium fell silent. And the winner of this year's Kingsway Academy Talent Gala is... He paused dramatically. Chukwudi Anamdi. The room exploded once more. Adeze, in her excitement, rushed onto the stage, nearly tripping, and threw her arms around Chukwudi. "I knew you would win," she sobbed with joy. Chukwudi's chest tightened with happiness. His heart felt like it would burst. For the first time, he wasn't a boy dancing to survive. He wasn't a shadow on a street corner. He was a champion, recognized for his talent. Teachers shook his hand. The students who had once mocked him now patted him on the back. Even the principal proudly declared, "A true Kingsway talent." But this victory meant more than the trophy or the applause. As Chukwudi stood on stage, holding his award, he looked towards his father and sister. His and Mr. Edward's eyes met. And in that moment, Chukwudi knew he wasn't just a guest in the Namdi family. He belonged. That night, the Namdi mansion was brighter and more alive than ever. Lively music played, trays of delicious food were served, and laughter echoed through the corridors. Adaze paraded around with Chukwudi's golden trophy, holding it up for everyone to see as if it were her own victory. Mr. Edward, standing quietly in a corner with a glass of juice, whispered to himself, "You were born to shine, my boy, and you're just getting started." The victory at the Talent Gala changed everything. At Kingsway Academy, the scornful whispers turned into admiring praise. The students who had once shunned Chukwudi now sought to talk to him at lunch, asking about his dance moves and his life. Obi Okoro and his friends now just stayed silent, avoiding him whenever he passed by. He was no longer an outsider. He had found his place. His story quickly became a media sensation in Lagos. Newspapers ran bold headlines, "From the streets to the stage. NNAMD's adopted son conquers Kingsway." Photos of Chukwudi in the middle of a passionate dance appeared on the front page. A local television channel even replayed the footage of his performance, the crowd's cheers still echoing. For the whole city, it was a fairy tale of hope. For Chukwudi, it was the sweetest victory of his young life. But far from the glamour of Ikoyi, in a dilapidated and run-down tenement building in Ajigunle, a man was watching that broadcast. His room was small and dim, lit only by the flickering light of an old television. His hands trembled as he touched the screen. His eyes, sunken from years of hardship and regret, suddenly widened. "Chukwudi," he whispered, "my son." That evening, as the Namdi family was preparing for dinner, the guards at the gate were startled by a man in ragged clothes, insisting on being let in. His voice was hoarse with desperation. "Please, let me see him. I am his father. I've come for my son." The guards looked at each other warily. The Namdi name was now spoken with reverence, and the man before them seemed to be the complete opposite of that. But his eyes held a fire of urgent pleading. They reluctantly led him to the mansion's main door. Inside, Chukwudi was laughing cheerfully with Adaze at the dinner table when the butler appeared, his face pale. "Sir," he said to Mr. Edward, "there's a man at the gate. He claims to be Master Chukwudi's father." A sudden silence fell over the room. The fork in Adaze's hand dropped onto her plate, making a sharp clatter. Chukwudi froze, his heart pounding. The memories he thought he had buried, the hungry nights, the days of abandonment, came rushing back. Mr. Edward's gaze turned sharp as ice. "Let him in." And for the first time in years, Chukwudi stood face to face with the man who had vanished from his world. The man who had abandoned him when he needed him most, leaving a boy to dance away his pain in the darkness. The grand dining room of the Namdi mansion, which moments before had been filled with laughter, was now submerged in a heavy silence. The man entered, his feet hesitating on the polished marble floor as if it were a thin sheet of ice about to break. His clothes were tattered, his shoes were worn, and his face was deeply lined with regret and wasted years. But his eyes, trembling and tear-filled, were fixed on only one person. "Chukwudi," he whispered, his voice breaking. My son. My son." Chukwudi's body went rigid. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, back when he was huddled under the bridge. His father would return, explain why he had left, and fix everything. But now that it was actually happening, his chest felt heavy with a cold, simmering anger. Mr. Edward stood up, his tall frame a solid shield between the man and Chukwudi. His eyes were as hard as steel. "You call yourself his father?" Mr. Edward began, his voice low and laced with contempt. Where were you when this boy had to sleep under a bridge? Where were you when hunger almost took his life? Where were you when my daughter's laughter returned because of him? Each of Mr. Edward's questions was like a physical blow, and the man staggered as if he had been struck. He collapsed, his knees hitting the marble floor hard, and the tears he had been holding back for so long began to flow. I failed, he sobbed, his hands covering his face. When his mother died, I fell apart. I lost everything. No job, no money. I didn't know how to take care of a child alone. I panicked, and I ran. I ran away like a coward, and I have carried that shame with me every single day since. He lifted his tear-streaked face, looking at Chukwudi with pleading eyes. But now I see you, alive, strong, and full of light. I saw you on television. I couldn't believe my eyes. And I am begging for a second chance. Chukwudi's fists clenched, his heart racing. The memories flooded back like a torrent. The nights begging on the streets, shivering in the cold, dancing with an empty stomach. He had been invisible to the world, including the man kneeling before him. Adize, her own eyes filled with tears, looked at her brother, waiting. She said nothing, but quietly stood up, took careful steps to Chukwudi's side, and took his clenched hand. Her grip was a silent reminder. You are not alone anymore. Mr. Edward remained silent, knowing this choice was not his to make. The entire mansion seemed to hold its breath. The man crawled forward on his knees, his voice choked with sobs. Please, son, forgive me. Let me be your father again. We can start over. Chukwudi's lips parted, his voice trembling. He had waited so long to say these words, but instead of hope, his words carried the weight of years of neglect. You lost that right when you left me behind. Chukwudi's words hung in the air, sharp and cold. The father trembled, shaking his head frantically as if to deny the truth. I was broken, son, he repeated, his voice desperate. I was weak. So was I, Chukwudi replied, and this time, his voice was steadier, carrying the weight of someone who had grown through adversity. I was broken too, but I didn't run. I danced. I fought. I survived. And now, I am not alone anymore. He squeezed Adize's hand gently, looking directly at the man who had given him life but had taken his childhood. When I was hungry, you weren't there. When I slept on cold cardboard, you weren't there. When I danced alone at intersections, just hoping someone would see me, you weren't there. But, his voice softened, the bitterness giving way to a deep gratitude. When I made Adize smile, she was there. When I needed a roof over my head, Mr. Edward was there. When I needed a family, this family was here. He took a deep breath, his final words spoken not with anger, but with simple truth. I don't need a father who abandoned me. I already have a family. Adize took a small step forward, her clear, firm voice ringing out in the silence. And he is my brother. Nothing can change that. Mr. Edward stepped forward, placing a hand on Chukwudi's shoulder. He didn't look at the man kneeling on the floor, but only into his son's eyes, his own gaze filled with boundless pride. This is your home, Chukwudi, he said solemnly. You don't have to search for love outside these walls. You have given us more than we could ever give you. It was the final blow. The man completely broke down. He understood that he hadn't just lost his son to a wealthy family. He had lost his son to a love that he himself had been unable to give. His cries were no longer pleas, but the sound of irretrievable loss. The guards gently entered and helped him to his feet. As they led him away, his sorrowful sobs faded into the Lagos night. Chukwudi watched until the figure completely disappeared. A storm of complex emotions swirled inside him. Sadness for that pitiful man, relief at finally having spoken his truth, and the peace of an old chapter truly closing. He turned around. He felt Adize's warm hand still holding his. He saw Mr. Edward's steady, loving gaze. He looked around the magnificent dining room, which was no longer a strange space, but home. For the first time in his life, Chukwudi realized something powerful. Family is not just made of blood. Family is made of love, of choice, of the people who stay when the rest of the world walks away. And in that moment, a deep and complete peace finally settled over the soul of the street dancer. Weeks passed, and the Namdi mansion was once again filled with joy. But this was not the fragile joy of before, but a deep, solid joy, tested by the storm. Adize's steps grew stronger and more confident. She was no longer afraid of the school playground. She now ran and joined in games with her friends with a radiant confidence. She still stumbled sometimes, but she always got back up on her own, with a smile on her face. The newspapers still wrote about Chukwudi, the champion of Kingsway, the miracle boy of the Namdi house. But within the walls of the mansion, no one cared about those titles. What mattered was Adiez's laughter and the warmth of a family that had chosen each other. One afternoon, as the sunset painted brilliant streaks of orange and gold across the Lagos sky, Mr. Edward stood in the garden, watching quietly. Chukwudi was dancing on the lawn. But this time, he wasn't practicing for a competition. He was dancing playfully, spontaneously, simply for the joy of it. Adieze tried to mimic his moves, but she soon burst into such fits of laughter that she nearly fell onto the grass. The air was filled with a pure happiness, the kind that no amount of money could buy. Mr. Edward whispered to himself, his voice full of gratitude, "I once thought I had everything, but it turns out, I had nothing until I met this boy. And through him, I not only got my daughter back, I found myself again." Chukwudi, catching his eye, smiled and waved him over. Mr. Edward walked towards them, and the three of them, a father, a daughter, and a son, not by blood, but by love, took each other's hands. Adize's voice rang out, clear and strong in the quiet evening air. "We are a family, and nothing will ever change that." The boy who once danced to survive was now dancing with his destiny. He was no longer invisible. He was loved. He had a home. And the mansion that once echoed with silence would now forever ring with the richest sounds in the world. Laughter, love, and the dance of a boy who turned despair into joy. Sometimes, the family we are born into fails us. But the family we find, the one built on loyalty, laughter, and unconditional love, is the one that saves us. And in the end, true wealth is not found in possessions, but in the connections that make our souls whole. Uplifting music swells. Narrator's voice becomes more intimate and direct with the audience. If this story has touched your heart, let us know how you feel in the comments. And don't forget to share where you're watching from in the world. And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next emotional, dramatic, and unforgettable story. Until the next story, always spread kindness, keep the faith, and stay tuned. If this story has touched your heart, let us know in the comments and share where you're watching from in the world. Don't forget to subscribe to your channel name for more emotional, dramatic, and unforgettable stories. Until next time, be kind, stay strong, and keep watching.